And you say, wait a minute, they have a progressive caucus. They do not have a progressive caucus. They have resume padding of 85 people who put on their letterhead, I'm in the progressive caucus. There are no requirements to be in it. There are no duties. And it doesn't ever do anything. Now, there are other caucuses that do things. There's the Blue Dog Caucus. They routinely say, we won't vote for that bill unless it's made worse in the following 3 or 4 ways, and then it is, and then they vote for it. They do things. The Progressive Caucus says things sometimes, some of their members, but they never do anything. It was groundbreaking last June when 57 of their members signed a letter to the Speaker saying, we won't vote for a health care bill that doesn't meet these minimal standards. And then it didn't, and 55 of those 57 voted for it anyway. Right? I would rather have a progressive caucus with 8 people in it that did something than 85 people who never do anything. Then we would start to have some leverage. I would rather have 80 people who did something, but start with what we can get. And I bring this up in part because the co-chair of the Progressive Caucus, such as it is, Congresswoman Lynn Woolsey, is coming to Los Angeles today. Now, Congresswoman Lynn Woolsey votes better than almost anybody in Congress, right? She votes better. She votes the right way. But she never, ever organizes she or anybody else organizes a caucus, a block of people to actually take a stand on anything, right? She doesn't oppose procedural votes. She doesn't go out there and publicly urge her colleagues and her party leadership to do the right thing. She doesn't behave the way one of us, an activist, would be in Congress. She's not all out for Congress. Well, a friend of many of ours from Los Angeles, a woman named Marcy Winograd, would be that kind of Congress member. She would be all out for peace and justice and sanity in Washington. And she's running for the second time now against Congresswoman Jane Harman. And she did very well last time, and she's a serious threat, perhaps the most serious threat in the country to an incumbent this coming year. And Marcy is an activist. She would be the best member of Congress far and away. Jane Harman, I'm not a huge fan of. Never seen a war she didn't like, never seen a crime she didn't want to excuse, isn't entirely sure if she works for the United States or Israel. When she's overheard by warrantless wiretapping and then blackmailed on that point, does she expose it? No. She lets herself be blackmailed, goes to the New York Times, says, don't tell the American public they're being spied on without warrants until you can let George W. Bush get a second term. And then when the story comes out, she's mad at the New York Times for printing it. This is Jane Harman. This is your ideal of corruption in Washington being taken on by the ideal of a progressive challenger. So if you were Lynn Woolsey and you were co-chairing the Progressive Caucus, what would you do at this moment? Who would you back? Well, she is in town today to raise money for Jane Harman. And those of us who think that's not the ideal strategy, that in fact primaries within a party are healthy for a democracy, that we have obviously demonstrated that having big majorities of people from a particular party doesn't get us anywhere unless they're the right people. A lot of people are going to be there. Get out your pencils again. Today, 3:30 to 5:30 in Venice at Danny's Deli. I don't know why, it's at Danny's Deli. To say we support Marcy Winograd and we want you, Lynn Woolsey, to support the right people. Our representatives, our elected officials are not all good or all bad. Our role is not to denounce them without break or to praise them and support them and obey them. They are public servants. And if we punish the bad things and reward the good things, we have a much better relationship with them. And, one of the tactics is electoral challenges. It's great we have people in the room who are running. Another is to lobby them. And on the issues I've been talking about, to make clear you want them to have more power than they have, but to use it for us. To go after them in the media is an all-important tactic. To go after their funders. I mean, we're past the point where politeness is the highest value in our relationship with these people who are slaughtering human beings around the world. And direct action has to be a component here. We have to be willing to go to Congress members' offices and sit there and not leave until they leave Afghanistan and Iraq and Pakistan and everywhere else that they need to leave. And if they're still talking about health care, cough a lot while you're sitting there. And be willing to go to jail. And have a rally outside the next day and honor those people who did that and send some more people in. So, doing this and getting Congress members to actually respond to us rather than their funders and so forth is very hard work. It's very unfair. We're up against the money and the media and the party leaders and so forth. It's useful to remember that we're a majority. On most issues of peace and justice and human rights and civil rights, you think you're like a fringe group because the television and the newspapers say so all the time. I have page after page of polling and surveys in my book that show that we are a strong majority on most issues. Americans are far more progressive and liberal and generous and informed than we imagine. And it helps just to know that. Look at the outpouring of compassion for Haiti. Those are Americans across the political spectrum that we can work with. Now, you look at places in Iraq where 25% of the babies are born with serious birth defects because of how we have poisoned those people. We don't have the same outpouring of support for obvious reasons, but we could get it. We also are a lot more active than we imagine because the televisions and the newspapers don't tell us. Progressive Democrats of America has vigils outside Congress members' offices all over the place on Wednesday, starting this month and then the third Wednesday of every month, to demand no more money for the wars. A lot of us with an effort called Peace of the Action, Peace, P-E-A-C-E, are going to be in Washington in March, disrupting, getting in the way, doing the things that the man who would have been 81 years old yesterday would have been doing. That Dr. King, here we are about to have a volunteer day for Dr. Martin Luther King. It makes about as much sense as sending George W. Bush to save Haiti. We have to have a national nonviolent resistance day for Dr. Martin Luther King. We also have a lot more successes than we imagine. If you read my book, you have a long discussion of local and state successes. And it's important because people succeed at smaller things and then they're willing to work harder for larger things. Some people don't need that, but a lot of people need that. I just came up here from San Diego where they have thus far kept Blackwater out. Those kind of local victories are happening everywhere. And people in the rest of the country don't know about it. Local and state victories, counter-recruitment victories. These wars are being fought and will be fought to exactly the extent they have the troops and the mercenaries. And we are restraining them by getting the tests out of the schools and the generals out of the kindergartens and the killing theme parks out of the shopping malls. We are winning those things. If we get health care in this country in a civilized way, it's going to be through states first. And California has passed a civilized single-payer health care plan twice. You just need a governor who would sign it. And incidentally, that is not Mr. Brown unless you change his mind, which you can do. But you have to change his mind. Clean elections, already mentioned here today. Going to start moving on clean elections, which is happening in cities and states around the country. We're going to get it from the bottom up to the national level. But we have to be the media and support good media and stop supporting bad media and tell each other these things. States can bring the National Guard home. You can force the legislature in this state to force the Guard home, to support resistors of illegal orders. You can make credit unions here and get your money out of the banks. You can resist foreclosures and help people just not leave. I like to tell a story. In Virginia, we started this big community garden. And lots lots of people coming together and working together, enjoyable work. We're building it. We're mostly digging ditches to try to get water to the garden, and we're getting a little bit in corners of it. And people get tired and burned out, and they need a break, but they come back and they work more. And we're making progress until these rain dance people show up. And they tell everybody we're going to have a rain dance. I'm not kidding. And we're going to have the biggest, most marvelous, colorful rain dance in the history of the nation. And we're going to take care of the garden. For 4 years, there's going to be all the rain that this garden needs. There's going to be rain we could believe in. We're going to have a rain dance that changes everything. Right? And so we do it, and it's wonderful, and it rains a little bit, and everybody tries to tell themselves it worked, and eventually figures out that it's just raining about the same as it ever did. And then everybody's devastated and distraught and disappointed and discouraged. And you say, well, did you really think a rain dance was going to work? And, well, no, of course not. Well, then why are you discouraged now? Why is everybody discouraged right now rather than last year or the year before or the year before? Why? Is this a massive coincidence? And he said, well, no. And I said, well, then let's get to work. Let's get the shovels. Let's get to work. I said, well, why do you think digging would work when the rain dance didn't work? You know, if this is not a blatant enough metaphor for you, let me quote Miss Emma Goldman, who said, if elections ever changed anything, they would be banned. Right? Which is not to say that we could get by without them, that they're not an element in how we could, but it is the activism between the elections. It is the work that starts the day after the election. It's 95% of our duty as citizens. And we have to stop thinking all the time about elections. In fact, I highly recommend trying to go for a week without thinking about past elections or upcoming elections or the President of the United States. It's very, very hard. You're going to have to get rid of your television. I recommend taking a bunch of televisions and making park benches for the homeless in front of the TV news studios and not owning the things, not letting them in your house. It's a very hard thing to do, but it has to be done. We can't lobby a president. We can hardly dream of influencing senators. We have to look at members of the House, where it's the weakest, lowest hanging fruit, where we have a chance at being heard. And we have to not get astroturfed when we're doing this work. And I don't just mean these corporate-funded, misinformed pseudo-rallies on the right. I mean on the left. All of the labor unions and all of the activist groups who go and ask the president or the Congress, what should we lobby you for? And then go out and tell their members what they can put on their posters and what they should demand, which turns you into a prop. It's them telling you what to do instead of you telling them what to do. So work with good groups like this group and many other groups around the country that, to one extent or another, are more willing to be independent. That is, independent of Washington, of the people we're trying to influence, rather than be influenced by. There's a blog called Firedog Lake that has decided that, because they said way back when a health care bill has to be at least this good, and this one ain't, they aren't happy with it, which you would think would be normal, principled reaction, but it's very, very rare. And they commissioned a poll in a district that discovered that a Democratic congressman is going to have a very hard time getting reelected if people are mandated to buy health insurance they've decided they don't want to buy. And this one Democratic congressman has decided to retire. And so there's a lot of anger, not at the act of passing this bill that forces people to do this thing they don't want to do, but at this blog for commissioning this poll to find out what people thought. That's where the anger goes. I think we have actually an opportunity in that we, as far as elections go, in fact, in a system completely dominated by two parties as ours is, we did everything right. We gave the better of the two parties the White House. Huge majority in the House, huge majority in the Senate. We did everything they wanted, all right? And you guys know the Constitution, apparently. Tell me which article the filibuster is in. They can throw the filibuster rule out tomorrow. And if they are keeping that excuse around, if they are leaving the fate of all legislation up to an election in Massachusetts and leaving an election in Massachusetts up to the Diebold Corporation, that is their choice. Right? They are making that choice, and they have to be told that we're onto them, and we know that they could throw out the filibuster rule tomorrow if we chose to. There's a website called endthefilibuster.org put up by Jonathan Tassini. Do you guys know who he is? A couple people. He's running for the Senate in the state of New York. You don't know this because the New York Times gives lengthy articles to all the people who are considering whether they might run for the Senate. But not him, who got 17% last time against an incredibly well-known woman named Hillary Clinton and would get more this time. The fact that he was the plaintiff in the lawsuit that forced the New York Times to pay money to its reporters when they put their work on the internet could possibly have something to do with it. I don't know. But I think when you get down to it, we don't need the Senate for most things. You know, in fact, my book has an argument for eventually putting the Senate out of its misery. It doesn't serve us any good, right? But even now, if you look at the House, you can use the power of the purse without the Senate or the President. We have these wonderful bills from our progressive Congress members related to the war. We should have a war tax. We should have an exit plan. We should not escalate, even though we're already escalating. What could the House do that's easier than passing a bill? Stop the funding. Because if you pass a bill, then you have to fantasize about the Senate passing it too and the President signing it against his will. If you just don't pass the funding in the House, then the Senate and the President can do whatever they want except fight wars. Except fight wars. Except that I usually leave this out so as not to discourage people because I don't think it actually should. But again, a congressman by the name of Sherman once asked a general by the name of Petraeus in a hearing, "What would you do, sir, if we stopped funding the wars and ended the wars and the president told you to keep fighting the wars anyway?" This was President Bush at the time. And General Petraeus stammered and stuttered and said he'd have to ask his lawyer, you know. But the point was that Congressman Sherman was onto the danger. The fact that they had let the presidency get completely outside the law to the point where they feared that even if they cut off the money, the war would keep going. I don't think that's a serious concern. I think if they cut off the money and the war keeps going, Americans will do what a civilized nation would have done long ago and shut Washington, D.C. down and protest until the government is really taken over. I think defunding the war is the way to go. If you go to defundwar.org, you'll see where every Congress member stands. You'll see the cost in taxes of these wars to your locality. You'll see the reasons why you have to multiply that by 5. You'll see the cost in military contracts to your community. And by the way, military dollars destroy jobs. If they tell you that military dollars create jobs, make sure they understand that there is nothing the government could do with our money that doesn't create more jobs than putting it in the military. Even the right-wing scheme of cutting taxes produces more jobs than putting money in the military, even domestically, much less in foreign wars. And putting money into education and mass transit and green energy and everything useful produces more jobs. I got an email this morning quoting a civil rights leader named Hosea Williams, who had worked with Dr. King, and an amendment he had proposed to our Constitution that would ban profiting from wars. I think that kind of reform and many similar reforms that are discussed in my book is where we ultimately have to go. But right now we have in front of us a golden opportunity and a clear path for what to do. In 1970, the Congress said no more money for a war in Cambodia. In 73, Vietnam. In 93, Somalia. In 98, Bosnia. Congress has repeatedly said no money for this war beyond this date. And there wasn't. And those wars did not go beyond those dates. So you don't need a bill. You only need the House. We have a golden opportunity handed to us because the president wants $33 billion in a supplemental spending bill for the wars. This is the second of the supplementals we were not to have anymore. And this will be on top of $708 billion for the military, the second record military budget in a streak of 2 thus far. And that's not counting the State Department and the CIA and Veterans Administration and NASA and so forth. We have, I think, a golden opportunity for people to say, okay, we got all the Democrats in. Now we need the right ones, the people who will do the right thing, force them to do the right thing. You know, Winston Churchill said you can always count on Americans to do the right thing after they've tried everything else. And we pretty much have tried everything else. So we have to build the pressure for taking the money out of there and putting it where we want. Whether we win it this year or not, we come close this year, we win it next year. That's that, remember ending slavery, getting women the right to vote, getting labor rights, getting civil rights. Generations, not this attention span of if we can't see how we win by next Wednesday, we don't do it. Working and enjoying it. It is your doctor's advice. Medical studies show it is good for you to be active and protesting and resisting in solidarity with your neighbors. It is so much better for you than sitting home and grumbling. This is not my advice. This is your doctor's advice. And I want to close with a few words that a reporter named I.F. Stone wrote that I put at the front of my book. The only kinds of fights worth fighting are those you are going to lose, because somebody has to fight them and lose, and lose, and lose, until someday somebody who believes as you do wins. In order for somebody to win an important major fight 100 years hence, a lot of other people have got to be willing, for the sheer fun and joy of it, to go right ahead and fight, knowing you're going to lose. You mustn't feel like a martyr. You've got to enjoy it. Thank you. And if we have time, I'd be glad to take any questions you may have. And feel free to introduce yourself.
We'll do it. I'll just call on people. So we've got in the back with the sunglasses. I saw your hand first.
Hi, my name is John Ho. And I have a question for you. Before we go too far, I want to bring back the issue of signing statement. Now, as we all know, the President of the state of George W. Bush, he's not